Welcome everybody to Phoenixville Library. I'm Mark Pinto, the Adult Services Director here, and I'm very pleased to have back with us for the fourth time, as I mentioned, Ellen Nelson from the Hill School in Pottstown. Tonight is Michelangelo's Rome, otherwise known as what she did on her summer vacation. Just wanted to tell you how this program came about. Ellen and I were emailing each other over the summer back in July, and I wanted to book her here in December sometime for another art presentation. And she had come up with the idea of, get her name right, Beatrix Ferrand, the landscape architect. So we were going with that idea. And she happened to mention in one of her emails, oh, I'm in Rome night now enjoying the art. And it's like, oh, really? So I got very jealous, and then she said, well, actually, yesterday it was over 100 degrees here in Rome. They're having a heat wave. So, but then I got to thinking, hey, you're seeing all this art here. Why don't we do a program? Why don't you put together a program on what you're seeing? And sure enough, she did that for us, narrowed it down to Michelangelo's works, and that's what you're going to get tonight. So, a little bit about Ellen Nelson. She is the Arts Department Chair at the Hill School in Pottstown, where she's taught for 28 years. She earned her BS at Ithaca College and completed continuing education courses at Moore College of Art and the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts. She is the gallery coordinator for the Center for the Arts Boyer Gallery at the Hill School, where she curates more than 6 exhibits annually. And in addition to teaching all levels of studio art, Ellen is an accomplished artist herself, whose work has been exhibited in New York and Philadelphia. So please give a warm welcome.
So again, I'd like to thank you for coming. And this, as Mark said, this lecture tonight, I hope you will enjoy a tour of Rome. In many ways, hopefully through the eyes of Michelangelo. I'm going to start out with kind of a little bit of my experience in Rome. As Mark said, it was an incredible heat wave. We were in 100 degrees, and we were all just like, couldn't get enough of it. The heat did not dampen did not snuff out our passion for what we were seeing. Has anybody been to Rome? It's just, I gotta go back. You know, they call it the Eternal City, and there's a reason for it. It just, the layers and levels of time periods that you get a sense of, the multicultural feeling in the city, the sort of hub of culture and art and music. It's just thriving with all kinds of history and culture, and the people themselves, of course, are always entertaining to watch.
And so this is the food.
And the food. I was really it was, you know, the food was just amazing. I was impressed upon the fact that maybe I was just looking in the wrong places, but after a while, the Italian food was fantastic, but I was like, well, you know, is there any Thai? Is there any other types? I couldn't find any other types of food, but I was happy with what I had. So it was just kind of interesting. Usually in cities you find a variety. So Michelangelo's Rome is, we're going to meet Salvatore and Antonio at the Hotel La Rovere, which is where I stayed. And if you ever want to, you know, enjoy a spot that's right there next to, in the back door of the St. Peter's, the Vatican, this is the place to go. They were cute. We called them brothers, but they weren't brothers. But they're ready to serve you. This Hotel Rovere is in sort of a back alley. And so you just kind of climb the cobblestones and go right in. Just absolutely beautiful, and the price was right too. And of course you can't go to Rome without tasting the prosciutto, the mozzarella, the basil, you know, you name it. And there's also the fresh fruit cups. I mean, just like, you know, salivating. And then of course the gelati, any flavor that you want, the lemon, the amaretto, the chocolate. This was kind of an interesting concept, la bella figura, the idea that the Italians are so fashionable. You know, you look at them and they're just like so casual and so beautiful, and you just want to eat them up. You know, and of course one of my favorite all-time movie stars. Can anybody identify the woman on the right? Yes. Yes, and I had the opportunity to meet her at one point, and I just like fell in love with her. She's just an amazing woman. I was working at a house that Sophia was a guest there, and I was sort of the en pair. I was the the house servant, and I'm like, oh gosh. So she was super cool, and I chauffeured her around a couple of times, so that was fun. But here you can just see the natural style, the ease in which they put things together. And of course we can't forget, the houses of Ferragamo, all those wonderful designers that are included. So, Michelangelo has an interesting location in history in terms of some of his fame. One of his famous taglines is the idea that he is the first Western artist to have a biography written and published while he was still alive. And so this one, Giorgio Vasari, The Lives of the Painters, Sculptors, and Architects, was really a pivotal book during the time period that it was published. This was later in his life. And but Michelangelo was still around, so he knew Vasari was a painter and knew Michelangelo, and so these are real first-hand accounts. And we continue to use Vasari's biographies as sources of first-hand information. And then we have Condivi, who published one a little bit later, a couple of years later. It was actually Michelangelo liked Condivi's biography better, and so subsequent editions of Vasari's work kind of incorporated some of Condivi's facts and ideas. So just a kind of a note, which is kind of interesting. So what we're going to do is, I was going to start with a map, and so what we're going to do is
hit escape.
Yeah, and I'm not the most tech-savvy person in the world. Just hit escape.
Yeah.
Top left. Top left.
And then you can minimize it.
Here.
There you go.
So what I wanted to do was just first, I was going to have to set up I just love, if anybody mess around with Google Maps, it's just wonderful. So here we are. We're going to, we'll take a plane flight over, and we'll land in Rome.
Just like
Ta-da! Did it? And then what we're going to do is we're just going to zoom in.
No airport.
And we're going to take a look at where Michelangelo was born. And I like this because here, and geography is so interesting to me because I love to get it in my head and get oriented north, south, east, and west. So the two big, hubs during this time period, and we're talking about the High Renaissance, which is the latter part of the Renaissance, and what's known as the Quattrocentro. And what they have at this point politically are powerful city-states. And so you have Florence, you have Milan, you have Siena, you have Venice, and Rome, of course. And there was no such thing as the country of Italy. It was just a series of very powerful city-states, and they were just trying to get organized after the medieval time period. So here's Florence, which was just like being, in many ways, a very different city to Rome. Florence remains almost unchanged. I mean, there's very much this sort of the same quality of Florence as it was in the Renaissance, whereas poor Rome just kept getting sacked after, it kept getting destroyed time and time again. So if we go over here, we'll find a small town known as Caprese. And let's see if we can actually find, we'll get close. It's about 70 miles. It's right in this area right here by the lake. And they actually call it Caprese de Michelangelo. They changed it to, and they're like, oh, this is where Michelangelo was born. And he was born to father and a mother. At that point, the father was a business administrator for the city-state of Florence, but they had stationed him over there in Caprese, just sort of temporarily. Michelangelo was the second son. There were 4 sons. He was the second son. There were 2 younger ones. By the time his mother gave birth to the 4th son, During that year, she passed away. And there's not a whole lot of detail about it, but unfortunately, the four sons were motherless. And so at 6 years old, Michelangelo doesn't have a mother. And so when he was being raised, traditionally, I don't know if there was a combination of the mother being ill at this time, but he was sent to a small town. This was just in northeast, right around here, a small town. His father owned a quarry there, and he knew of a family, and so off Michelangelo goes as a young baby and is nursed by a wet nurse. And it's kind of interesting because there's a quote, and this is a direct quote, right in Vasari, and so it's taken right from his mouth, which is kind of unusual. "If there is some good in me, it is because I was born in the subtle atmosphere of your country of Arezzo." Arezzo is that section there of the northeast Florence. "Along with the milk of my nurse, I received the knack of handling chisel and hammer with which I make my figures." So it turns out that the wet nurse was actually a wife and also a daughter of stonecutters. So that's sort of the legend that he kind of was had it in his system, this idea of his affinity to the stone. So we will also be moving back and forth from Florence and Rome, and that's what Michelangelo did. Most of his early upbringing would be in Florence, and when he becomes older, like in his when he was 21, he then goes to Rome. He's called to Rome by a cardinal. And so, I love looking at maps, and I love trying to figure out, okay, so I'm put myself back in there, okay, so how am I going to get to Florence, or how am I going to get to Florence? I'm in Rome. So how do you do that back in wherever we are? We're in just about 1500. How are you getting there? How are you doing that? By horse. Yeah, you're on horseback. Okay, so this is 170 miles, and I Googled it. It's amazing what you can find, So how many miles can you travel on a horse a day? 10? Yeah, they said somewhere between 20 and 30. You don't want to push the horse too much. So I was gauging about 20. So it's going to take you 9 days to get from Florence to Rome. So it's just this concept of, we often think, oh yeah, you take your plane, you take your train, or no, this is on horseback or a carriage, right? A carriage. Later on in life, when Michelangelo was quite famous, and he was wealthy at the end of his life, although he struggled getting payment from the popes. He would just hop on his horse every day and go to St. Peter's and monitor the work. And he lived a very humble and very sparse, kind of life. It was great because when he passed away, he was considered a national hero. I mean, it wasn't a nation, but he was loved and really revered. And so they carefully closed off his house and took inventory of his house. Very, very modest. And there's only a list of 15 things that he owned. No books, no sketches. He really just tried to do quality control on his sketches. The idea that he didn't want anything that was inferior to enter, into the public realm. So it's oh no, none of this, and you just burn it and trash it. So really interesting. So it gives you an insight into the type of person he was. Kind of a very, very complex individual, very demanding. Probably a little bit grumpy, a lot grumpy, because he set such high standards for himself, and he set high standards for those people around him. He did have some very, very close friends, but those close friends that he had were few and far between. His struggles throughout his life in terms of commissions and the popes, pulling him from place to place, really did try his patience. He was truly a genius in terms of what he could do, and from the get-go, he was recognized as having amazing innate talents. So let's go ahead and go back to our presentation here. So a little bit about Florence. So what he does is, born in Caprese, gets transported to the little town to be nursed, and then later on, when he's about 13 or 14, his father says, "Okay, now it's time for you to get your education." And so he was taught for a little while, a very short period, by a gentleman whose name is Urbino, and he was to learn grammar. And Michelangelo was like, I just want to draw, I just want to hang out with my artist friends. And so his father wasn't really, too keen on this. His father kind of wanted him to follow in his footsteps. He was a public administrator. But finally his father relented and saw what Michelangelo could do and said, okay, I'll hook you up with a guy. His name was Ghirlandaio, and he was in Florence. And so they started the tutelage of learning how to become an artist. During this time period, it was a very organized, very well organized guild system. The guild system was an established workshop studio where the apprentices, right, they would work and they would do all the manual labor, and then they would slowly gain more and more responsibilities and talents and skills, and they would become journeymen, right, and then they would become masters. So it was a very specific way in which they were taught. And so at some point, when Michelangelo was about 14 or 15, Lorenzo de' Medici, he was known as Lorenzo the Magnificent, got wind that there was a hot shot there with Ghirlandaio. And so Lorenzo says, hey, send me 2 of your best guys. And sure enough, one of them was Michelangelo. So Michelangelo goes to Lorenzo's house. Now Lorenzo is like the king of Florence. I mean, not the king, but operationally he was the king. Very influential family. Does anybody know how the Medici got their wealth? Because Florence is getting more and more organized and getting more and more rich. What was it?
Banking.
Banking, excellent. They were one of the first families to get the idea that, hey, I'm going to loan you some money, and then you're going to pay me back, but you're also going to pay me back some interest. And so that's how they built up their money. So they became very, very influential in terms of their power. And so it goes back and forth with the Pazzis and the Medici and all that. What's happening in Florence is it's really building, and it's getting just blowing up in terms of the art that's being produced in this area during this time period due to the sponsorship, the patronage of the Medici family, because Lorenzo the Magnificent loved art and understood that one of the ways that you create a culture, that you help sustain a culture, is you encourage the arts. It's a no-brainer. And so he would subsidize the artists, and not only Lorenzo the Magnificent, but also the guilds, say the Wool Guild and the Goldsmithing Guild, and all of those guilds. They would have contests and help sponsor the artists, so it was all sort of a mutually agreeable situation. So that's Florence in terms of what's happening there. And I mentioned that he was apprenticed to Ghirlandaio. And then all of a sudden he finds himself in the most amazing palace of all times. And so Michelangelo is actually hanging out with the Medici family. He's eating meals with the family. The Medici at that point had sons, and so he's hanging out with the bigwigs. And learning, being taught. In the Medici palace, there's gardens, and in the gardens are these ancient Roman artifacts, and so he has all kinds of examples to draw from and learn from. So he's being taught and is around other artists too. So it's a very much an encouraging environment for him to be in. Poor Michelangelo. I'm sure he was just an instigator and got under people's skin. Apparently, there's other students around, and maybe the other student was jealous, but at one point, Torrigiano just says, I've had enough, and just pops Michelangelo right across the bridge of his nose. And this is another quote by, maybe I have it here, another quote that was in Vasari's biography. And he says that he could actually feel the crunch of the bridge of the nose like a biscuit just folding in his fist. So forever, yes. So that's Michelangelo, and it's a painting of Michelangelo. It's interesting when you go on the internet. You can read anything on the internet. It's like, no, that's not true. So you have to be you have to be very careful about your research. My goodness, they're like there's self-portrait. Well, there are self-portraits of Michelangelo, but they're usually embedded into other works, and we'll get into that. But there's no, as far as I know, there's no official self-portrait of Michelangelo. So these are actually based on a death mask that was made by at the time of Michelangelo's death. There is a whole history of death masks. You can find Abraham Lincoln's death mask. You can find a lot of famous people. That's what they would do. These poor people would die and they'd be laid to rest, and then I guess somebody comes in and lays plaster on their face and boom, makes a cast. It's the way that they memorialize and keep in their memory the actual facade. But they're kind of weird because they're dead people. They're like, ugh. It's weird. So there you go. So whenever you see, if you're suspecting that it is a depiction of Michelangelo, usually the telltale sign is that mashed in upper section of his nose. So he works for a time period at the Church of Santa Maria della Santo Spirito in Florence. Now we haven't even gotten to Florence yet to Rome yet, because he's hanging out in Florence, really soaking in all the culture and everything he can do to learn. And he presents the prior there with a beautiful polychrome crucifix. He established the relationship with the prior, and so he was able to dissect the corpses coming from the hospital. So this is how he learned the anatomy. And if you know anything about Michelangelo, he knew the body inside and out. Like no bones about it. He understood the ligaments and the process of the muscle contraction, the bones, everything, because he knew it inside and out. Unfortunately, after a couple of days or a couple of weeks of dissections, you can imagine what it was like. Oh God. So he said, and this is another quote by Vasari, he says it would just make him sick to his stomach, and he had to stop. Well, it would make anybody sick to their stomach. But he did learn, he understood, and you can see in his work the informed way in which he approaches the human body. So that's the one there. So he's 17 and 19. See, dates to me don't make a whole lot of sense, because I got a thing with numbers. They don't connect. So I like to kind of imagine, okay, how old was Michelangelo at this time? That just makes more sense to me. So I tried to put, okay, how old was he? Because 1420 92 doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
I just want to add that that's the year that Columbus.
Yeah.
Right. That's the year, 19.
That's right.
1492. So put it in that context.
I know. I love it. I love it. Absolutely. So and we're talking 500 years, or more. It's incredible in terms of forays into the New World. All kinds of interesting things happening, right? You have Martin Luther with his Reformation. We have all kinds of innovations, the printing press, right? So everything's just like on fire in terms of innovation and the human race the Western culture, we're just focusing on Western culture, really making great bounds in terms of advancement. We talk about what happened before the Renaissance, and we go into the medieval ages or the Dark Ages, and I think that's kind of a misnomer, because there were things that were happening there, innovations there, but for some reason it just seemed like all the stars lined up. You had Raphael, right? You had Donatello, you had Bramante, you had all these superstars, and they all happened to be at pretty much within a 50 to 100 year time period, either in Florence or traveling to Rome. It was pretty incredible.
It's sort of like France in the mid-1800s.
Exactly. Perfect. I love it. Yeah, please, if you have things to add, I love that. Absolutely. So it's almost like it goes beyond sort of coincidental, that you're like, hey, wait a minute, Exactly. So we have the late 1800s in Paris with Pablo Picasso and Braque and Post-Impressionists. That's right, and Renoir. Absolutely. Okay, so then he says enough of that, So what happens is he gets called to Rome, and one of the cardinals gets wind of his talent and says, I think I would like to hire him, commission him to do a figure for my tomb. During this time period, the religious leaders, the popes, the cardinals, they wanted to make sure that they were remembered after their death. And so the big thing was, okay, while you're living, you start paying for a tomb for yourself, which is just kind of bizarre for me, I was like, I'm not really thinking that way, but this is what they would do. And as we go in further, we'll find out that Pope Julius II and his tomb was just sort of poor Michelangelo's demise. Or he called it the tragedy of the tomb. But here we have the Pietà. commissioned by the French Cardinal, Jean de Behaire, for his tomb. And this one is absolutely beautiful and stunning. And what I'm going to do is give you just a minute.
Yeah.
I'm going to turn out the lights because I just want you to reflect. I'm going to just take like maybe just 2 minutes. Because I think it's good just to stop and look. To give you some sense of scale, this is a carving of solid Carrara marble, so this is one solid block. The block probably measured 6 feet by 6 feet by about 8 feet. The present sculpture measures about 6.5 feet by 6 feet by about 5 feet. Think about the subject. Think about how the subject is presented to you. Think about maybe the anatomy. Think about scale. Think about the age of the two people. Look at the highlights and the shadows. Imagine if you were the sculptor, and how would you sculpt this? Okay, I'm going to turn on the lights. So watch your eyes. Usually when I do this, I just ask you to like kind of close your eyes because I hate to kind of mark which one.
The two on the ends.
2 on the ends. Did I get it?
Yep.
Ouch, that hurt. Okay. So what do you think?
How did he get it shiny like that?
Good question. Great question. So Michelangelo, it just blows me away that some human can do this, right? I mean, it's just kind of mind-boggling. Okay, so he goes to Carrara, which is in northern Italy, and he literally picks out. Sometimes the marble blocks are already available for him, but for the Pope Julius II's tomb, he literally went up to the mountains and picked out and started telling, this is what I want. So then it gets shipped out, and these things are huge. So if we look at this corner, right? Okay, so this is what he's dealing with. Now, apparently, I'm going to get to your question. Who asked the question? There you are. Okay, I'm going to get to your question. So, Michelangelo was unique. Normally, what happens is any earthly sculptor like me. I'm not a sculptor. I don't know what I am. I'm an artist. Okay, so here's my block, right? And I got my hammer and my chisel, and I do have a slide of what a hammer and a chisel look like. But, okay, so I'm like boom, 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 and I go around and I go around and I go around, right? I'm just like checking it out, and I'm just rough hewing, and I finally get it like that. I go 360 around. Do you know what Michelangelo did? Oh, he didn't do that. Okay, so what he did, he started from the front and worked to the back. And that is mind-blowing. What they say he did was he created it was probably quite large, a large wax model, okay? And then he got a bathtub and positioned the large wax model in the bathtub. And the first thing would be, the model would be completely submerged in water. Okay, imagine the bathtub and the figure. And then he would just hoist it up just a little bit. So in this instance, maybe hoisting it up just a little bit would reveal just these. I know.
So he had guidelines.
He had a guideline, right, he had a guideline. And he's probably taking calipers. Calipers are, little kind of strange little measuring things, right? He's measuring, because he's got probably he's got a ratio, this model, right? So times 8 or whatever. But that just blows me away in terms of that's the way he approached it. Now, when you said the smoothness, how does it get the smoothness? It's interesting that you should ask, because Michelangelo actually had a quote, and he said he never wanted his sculptures to look overlicked. Overlicked. Okay. What does that mean? Anybody have any idea? Overlicked.
Wet?
Wet? Good. He was referring to the salt licks that were the salt blocks that are left out for the cattle. Right? Have you ever seen those? They're absolutely fascinating because they get sculpted by the cattle. Lick, 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 nice and rounded. Because when you look at you look at skin, right? It's not shiny. well, maybe if you have a lot of oil on it, but it's not shiny. So he always said, you know, the other sculptors, they overlick them. That means it's too shiny, it's too polished. Now, what you are seeing is you're seeing waxes that have been put on the marble to help preserve and condition the marble. So this is not the way it would appear, you know, when it was freshly done. The marble has aged too. It gets darker as it sort of just gets more exposed to the air. So great question. No, he never really wanted that glare. He wanted that matte kind of finish. So
Wouldn't it have to be, it would have to be, I mean, probably when he finished it, it was basically, I don't know what if there were gradations of color in it, but it would be basically white. I mean, I've seen
That's
people work
correct.
with marble, you know.
That's right. The Carrera marble.
And so he would have to deal with, you know, how deep do I make something to create deep shadows,
That's
because
right.
you're working white against white.
White against white, exactly. And he learned how to use the drill, and the drill was a hand drill. It's kind of like a bow, and so that's how he would get into those deep crevasses. But it's just absolutely simply astounding that a human being, an earthly human being, can create something like this. The way in which all the parts seem to cohere to create a comprehensive whole. The way in which he is able to evoke emotion in the combination of the two figures. Here's Mary, and it's pietà. What do you imagine pietà means?
Jesus had died and she's holding their son.
That's right, and so pietà means pity or compassion. So it's the sorrow that Mary is experiencing as she's holding her dead son. So tell me about the size, the scale of Mary to Jesus.
She
larger. Yeah, she looks larger, right? And that's the way it had to be, because somehow he had to figure out how is Mary going to be holding, you know, her adult son. The other thing, so she is enlarged. Her lap is actually enlarged. Her hips are enlarged, and if you compare her head to the rest of her body, her head is very much smaller. But he knew this. He knew anatomy, and this was all done very calculating. We also, when this came out, there was a little bit of criticism in terms of, okay, so Mary, how old does Mary look? Not too old, not enough to have a 30-year-old son, right? Yeah. But Michelangelo didn't care. He wanted this to be about, you know, younger people, and so it's just a stunning combination of emotion and the informed human anatomy. She's holding her dead son, and look at this hand on the left-hand side. Her hand. What's that? What's happening with that? What's going on? There she has her, and she's just like this, holding here, right? What is that? Why doesn't she have her hand on his knee or whatever? What is that doing?
Pointing to something.
Right. Why? Or some people think it's a presentation. She's presenting her son, the sacrifice for the world.
Suffering.
This is the suffering. Here it is. This is what I offer to the world. There's also medieval connotations, Byzantine connotations, in terms of the idea of Mary as the throne of wisdom. And she is sort of the launching pad for Jesus, and that's how you get that kind of symbolism there with the throne. Mary's lap, in essence, becomes the throne for Jesus. And for me, one of the most exquisite aspects of this sculpture is the place right there where she has her fingers, they're spread, and you can see the pressure of his weight on her fingers. And it's like, wait a minute, that's marble. Yeah. But somehow Michelangelo has made it so that it looks like the weight of Jesus is pressing on her hand, and it's just pretty astounding. When this was revealed, everybody loved it. They said, you know, they applauded Michelangelo as a skilled and an amazing artist. So he kind of hit it a home run with that one. There was some minor criticism, but for the most part, it was a real hit, a home run. And he's doing this at 21, so he's like rock star, you know, right from the beginning. Did you have a question?
How long did it take him to complete this?
That's a good question. I believe it was 2 years. Let me just make sure that is correct.
Your previous slide had it.
Did it? there a way to go back?
Yeah, there's arrows on the right.
Was there that remote?
I'd have to connect it and
Oh, that's okay.
install the software.
That's okay. I have dates here. Let's see, just for a second. It says that age 98 to 99, so 2 years. Yeah, so 2 years, which is really phenomenal. He was. If you're wondering about the physical stature of Michelangelo, he wasn't particularly tall. I don't think most people at that time were. Probably about, we don't know exactly, but probably about 5'6" to 5'7". But because of the work that he's doing, he's probably pretty ripped, you know, he's not really concerned about eating too much because he's always working. He's like a workaholic. He's just, you know, bent on getting things done. So I like to imagine him as a fairly muscular, very thin individual.
Did it ever make it on the tomb of the cardinal?
No, it didn't.
No, I didn't
And
think
no,
so.
it didn't. It now is in present day St. Peter's
It's in
Basilica.
St. Peter's,
right.
I've seen it.
Yes, and his remains, the cardinal's remains, are not associated or not buried in St. Peter's. You have to be a pretty special person.
Whatever happened when there was an incident where somebody tried to smash it?
Yeah,
What
there was
happened with that?
he was determined as mentally deranged. He came in with a hammer. There was a really flimsy barricade. He just goes up and over it and smacks it like 12 times. Hit her nose, hit her arm. It was pretty devastating. They were able to repair it. There was a lot of conjecture as to, do we repair it? Does it become part of history as you know, as a destroyed object? But they did, after all, say no. We do want to restore it. Does anybody? This is wild. Did anybody go to the World's Fair, New York World's Fair in 1964? I did. Did anybody see the Pietà there? Oh my God, that's so cool. So they had a conveyor belt, right? It was a 3-tiered conveyor belt. It was actually a conveyor belt, like a moving sidewalk, right? So you're on the sidewalk and it's like moving. And they, in the time period that they had the Pietà on display, I mean, 1 million people went through. It was incredible. It was unbelievable. It was interesting because I had a conversation with my sister. I said, no, we didn't want, because I was only 4 at that time period. I was like, oh, well, I did see it. I just don't remember. But my sister, my older sister, remembers it. But amazing. So, rock star status right away, you know, just like hit it out of the park. And so he's going back to check on it. And he overhears a few people talking about it, and they said, oh, it was by another artist. And so Michelangelo's like, oh my God, this is horrible. So he sneaks back at night and he chisels on the banner there, if you can see that stripe that goes down between her breasts, and it says made by Michelangelo.
Oh my
God. Okay, so there's no, you know, equivocation here. It's definitely by Michelangelo, and of course, as soon as he did it, he was like, oh my God, what did I just do? And from then on, he never signed another one. Oh. So I guess he learned his lesson. Oh, poor guy. So let's move on to the next one. And we're just going to show you the close up. There is that unbelievable ability to capture the weight of Jesus on the hand of Mary. It's just mind-blowing. Not to mention the anatomy. That goes without saying. I mean, the ripples of the intercostal muscles, the rib cage, you know, it's just all there. It's so well. Oh, I know. So it's like he is no longer living, and so there's no give there. It's just zoom down.
I think it gets accentuated by the armpit, the bulging of the armpit.
That's correct.
I mean,
That's
that really
right.
brings it to life because it makes
Right.
it makes the upper arm look very
Right.
like a piece of meat.
That's
you know?
right. It's a complete drape,
Yeah.
a lifeless drape, and that's what he has become. And then the details of that slash in his rib, right? What's the story? They wanted to see if he was still alive, and somebody, was it the blind guy who goes and stabs him in the side, and then the water or whatever comes out, and the guy can live. So it was kind of, I mean, can see it was a miracle, one of Jesus' last miracles according to Christian faith. just incredible in terms of the way in which he's able to hold all those parts together to create that incredible cohesion. And then that is Mary's hand on the left-hand side, or Mary's left hand, and then Jesus's left hand also. So that's kind of cool too, because you see that relationship. Okay, we're gonna be here till midnight if I don't get moving. Holy cow! This is really unusual, because you just, when you see it, when you go to St. Peter's, you walk in the door, and just take a couple of steps, and then look to your right, and there it is in all its glory. I have a link where you can kind of see, where you can see it. One of the things that's kind of strange is St. Peter's is just so massive. It's 480 feet up to the top of the dome. And you're just like, your mind's about to blow apart because it's so massive. And then you take a look and you see the Pietà, and actually the Pietà looks like, whoo, whoo, it looks small. But it's you know, it's about as big as, I said, 5.5 feet. So, you know, it's basically the size of this table and up, pretty much like this screen area. So to give you some sense. This photograph was taken when they were installing the Pietà at the New York World's Fair. There was a photographer who was actually in charge of the music program for the big event. And he actually climbed ladders and, you know, he took rolls and rolls of film, because you really can't get that shot now. They won't let you take that shot, because that one you have to be like up top. But I think it's important to see that, because you don't ordinarily see it if you're just seeing it in person. And of course it has a big bulletproof shield against it too. But there you can see the signing, Michelangelo. Unbelievable. I love the undulations of the drapery, you know, it's kind of like back and forth and back and forth. You can imagine him, you know, just really enjoying the curves and all the intricacies involved in that drapery. You can imagine that he was classically influenced. He's surrounded by Roman ruins, Roman sculpture. There are no existing Greek sculptures today. They were all destroyed. The ones that we have, we call them Greek, they're actually Roman copies. We have a few, at least marble. We have a few bronze, Greek bronze sculptures. So he's being informed by this sort of classical style, very much referring to a degree of idealization. You know, he's taking license to give praise to the human body, because he was very much a religious person, and he believed that the beauty within the body was a reflection of God. And so that was what he determined he was going to dedicate his life to, that he was going to reflect that beauty, because the beauty in all of us is a reflection of God. And so through his sculptures, that's what he was trying to capture. Yes?
Did he use living models to make the wax model, or did he just do it from his head?
Yes, he would have models in terms of specifically who they were. We don't know, but he would use models, and that would be part of the whole, you know, the whole procedure in terms of getting a mock-up. Start with drawings, figure out the positioning, hire models, and then start rendering the model. The maquette, they call it, which is the small model. Yes.
Did he do the models in that much detail, or did he add that detail as he did the main?
Yeah, added the detail, so that would just help him with the positioning and things like that. Right. And you know, in terms of the models, his use of models, there's no documentation of the specific models. I'm just assuming that he's in an environment where there's lots of artists. I don't know if he actually had a female model. I don't think he did. He certainly had male models. At this time period, it probably wasn't okay to have a female model. And you know, I didn't want to get into it a lot in terms of, you know, his representation of the male versus representation of the female. But I'm going to let you make your own conclusions about that in terms of his interpretation of you know, sexuality and gender issues. But this is another beautiful view that would be coming in from her left side, Mary's left side. And I think this is the last one. And there, it's like you see the hammer, you see the chisel, and you're like, good glory, how does that work? And then the way it works is you just keep refining. So you take the big chisel, then you work down to the smaller chisels, you use your rasps, and then you use your files, and then you finally use the pumice, and you get down to the final thing. So it's, anybody who's worked in wood or stone, it's just like a very labor intensive, you're completely covered with marble dust, and it wasn't, sweet and dainty like the painting. There's always this dichotomy of Leonardo da Vinci, right? He's painting the Mona Lisa, and he's all like in his fancy clothes, and there on the other side of town is, Michelangelo, and he's completely covered in marble dust. In fact, Leonardo at one point referred to Michelangelo as like a baker's son, because he's just covered with the marble dust. He looks like it's all flour, So it's just mind-boggling that they're all there, just working together. They competed with one another for, and that's just the final one for commissions. So he travels back to Florence. At this point, he's like 23, and I'm just going to quickly, I'm trying to focus on the things that he did in Rome, but I couldn't give this lecture without at least one photograph of David. David is 18 feet tall. And I had to include the one on the left-hand side because you get some sense of this colossus. Holy cow. And this block of marble sat in a warehouse for years and years and years, and no one would touch it because it had a flaw in it. It had a crack that ran right up the middle of it, like right here. And Michelangelo kind of looked at it. He's like, And the thing with Michelangelo was that he said that he would actually see the figure within the stone, right? And all he had to do was just like, uncover it. Oh, sure, that seems easy to me, right? He was revealing what was already there. And the only thing that I can think of that would draw a parallel to that is if you study the way in which Mozart composed his symphonies and his music. It was almost as if it was like fully born in his head. Now, it's not to say that he didn't struggle with some passages, but if you compare Beethoven's original score with a Mozart's original score, Beethoven's is like, there's cross outs and everything like this, and over here, Mozart, it's just like there. It's like a gestalt. The German word is the whole. And so Michelangelo saw the whole thing in that block. And so for him, it was really quite simple. I just take everything away that doesn't belong. Okay, good, go for it, God. It's like, I can't do that. I can't do that. Oh. Now Pope Julius becomes Pope, and he, is definitely aware that Michelangelo is like the rock star in town, and he gets this idea that he wants a tomb monument. So the original plan for this tomb monument, and he gets Michelangelo all excited about it. He's like, yeah, let's do it together. And Michelangelo's like, great, I love doing this stuff. Just keep paying me. Originally, this tomb, and let me get my facts straight here, the original plan was supposed to include 40 carved figures. That means over life-size figures. So let's take like a Pietà times 40, right? With angels and bronze reliefs, and then Pope Julius was going to be at the top, and he was going to be like over life-size. So all is good until they actually get to the pragmatism of it, and it's like, oh my God, But Michelangelo was really excited about it, and so he says to Pope Julius, he's like, okay, this is great, And I don't know if he got that excited because he's not that tight, but so he goes and he says, great. I think what we're going to have to do in order to get this tomb, positioned, is we're going to have to rebuild St. Peter's. Because it won't fit in St. Peter's, the present St. Peter's. The present St. Peter's is actually like a rebuilding of an old 300 AD basilican plan. And I'm trying to keep this short. And so they said, yeah, okay. So Pope Julius II, he wants to leave a legacy. So he's like, okay, let's go and rebuild St. Peter's. And so that's how it started. Unfortunately, that came back to bite Michelangelo because what happened was when Michelangelo started saying to Pope Julius, well, you know, I'd like to start working on this tomb, Pope Julius kind of blew him off because all of a sudden there wasn't enough money because a lot of the money was being diverted to the reconstruction of St. Peter's. There's also politically a lot of stuff going on too. The French are coming in and there was all kinds of crazy political stuff too. So the coffers of the Vatican, you know, the money in the Vatican with the Pope are starting to get a little thin. So every time Michelangelo comes up to Pope Julius II and says, you know, what about the tomb? Pope Julius II just sort of puts him off. So Michelangelo secretly continues to work on the tomb, all right? So let's just hold on to that and try to figure out how that's going to place. Okay, so
Was
now.
this gonna be one piece? Was this gonna
No,
be-
this was gonna be several pieces. It was gonna be multiple pieces. It was gonna be 3 stories high. Pope Julius was gonna be over life size and at the top, and then, you know, craziness. And
Was
but
he-
Michelangelo was like, wow, you know, let me have it.
Was he gonna do just the figures, or was he gonna do the whole?
He was going to probably get assistance with the rest of it, but he was gonna
Yeah,
do the figures,
figures,
right? So he
figures.
started working on the figures. So as I talk, imagine him working on his figures, sort of in silence, sometimes publicly and sometimes for no money, but he was really, you know, excited about it. He had all the sketches for it. He had some of the maquettes and ready to roll. So weirdly enough, Pope Julius II says, oh, and so, you know, forget about the tomb. I want you to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. And Michelangelo was like, what the heck? I'm a sculptor. He was a painter. He could paint. He did some beautiful tondos. Tondos are round paintings, you know. So he was trained in all the visual arts. But you don't say no to the Pope. So there he is for 4 years, and he is painting the ceiling. And the ceiling is 60 feet up. He designed the scaffold. And when they did the restoration from 89 to 94, they actually reconstructed his scaffolding system. It was a beautiful system. There were still holes in the wall where you could put the scaffold. Now keep in mind that the ceiling, the Sistine Chapel, is it used to be a storehouse for armaments. Now it is just, do you know what happens in the Sistine Chapel? What do? They vote for the Pope. All the cardinals go in and there's something like white smoke and clear smoke, right? So the Pope Julius there had been a history of artists coming in and doing paintings and that around the wall. These are earlier works by people like Perugino and Sangallo. Everything's fine. Pope Julius says, I want this decorated. Originally, it was just a blue sky. It was beautiful. A blue sky and then gold leaf, real gold stars. And so you can't say no to the Pope. So Michelangelo goes, okay. And so he starts the drawing, starts the drafts. He decided that he was going to use the scenes from Genesis. That's the first book of the Bible, which is the beginning of time and moving forward. And that's what he did. I don't know, I have links for this, but maybe we'll just keep rolling and see what happens. Okay. So, fresco. What is fresco?
Paint on wet plaster.
Oh, painting on wet plaster, right. The first thing you do is you hope and you pray that you know what you're doing. When Michelangelo started, he really didn't know what he was doing. He had some assistants, but knowing him, he wanted to do a lot of it by himself. And one of the first ones that they did, which was the drunkenness of Noah, it just like was a complete and total technical failure, and they had to chisel it off and start again. This was the very beginning. It's like, oh great, this was a good start. And it blows me away because with plaster, and they mix plaster, it's just a big messy job. You take your trowel and you mix the intonico and the lime and the there's a purple substance, and you're mixing. All the while, the clock is ticking. It's ticking. What's gonna happen if I go take a break or take a nap? It's gonna set up, and I'm gonna have to chisel that thing off, and I'm gonna have to start again. So, okay, so you're not only under time constraint, but you are either on your back or you're standing up looking up like this, and you take your trowel and you fill it with the plaster, right? I don't know how they did this. They just like throw it up there and done, like literally. Oh my God, it's gonna come. I mean, you've all painted ceilings, right? That's a terrible thing to do. Okay, plaster. Okay. So then they put the Antonico. That's the first layer. And then they go with their cartoons. Cartoons are paper patterns. And they either do a Pound's wheel to get the pattern up. And then they take their pigments. He only had 7 pigments. Obviously, this is not the day where you can go to Dick Blick and pick up your pigments. They're all, you know, from the earth and all that. 7 pigments. He created all those colors. That's all you really need. It's just, it's an incredible program, and the more I study it, the more I find, you know, it's like one of those things, like the deeper you go, the more you find, and that's what's fun about it. So scenes from Genesis, there are prophetic figures on the left and the right, and that's the one. It's mind-boggling. There's over 300 figures. There are nudes, there are prophets and sibyls. And these are the scenes of the Genesis. It's just mind-boggling. It is a barrel vault, okay? So it's vertical walls. It's not, you know, the Sistine Chapel's not that big. It's probably like 90 feet long, 60 feet tall. Vertical walls, and there's not a whole lot of light. There's very small windows. And then it goes up to a barrel vault. Now think about this. You've got a barrel vault. So the surface is deformed. It's not a flat plane, right? So what does that mean when you paint figures on a deformed surface like that? Good golly, right? What Michelangelo had to do was he had to stretch and use a lot of foreshortening to actually make it seem as if we were looking at figures on a flat plane. And that blows me away how he was able to do that too. And this is like, you know, he's not a painter. He knows how to draw though, so I think that's what helps him.
Where did he start?
Where did he start? Great question. So he starts in the back. And let me see if I can give you. So Last Judgment Wall, that's where the altar is. He starts in the back with the drunkenness of Noah. And I told you the story there where it was just a complete and total wreck. And he had to start again. He didn't have very many assistants, you know, 3 or 4. And can you imagine, I mean, like climbing the scaffold and you've got your buckets and oh my gosh. Then the flood, sacrifice of Noah, original sin and the banishment of, this is, you know, the what do they call it, the Garden of Eden. Yeah, but when they get expelled, expulsion of the Garden of Eden. Eve, creation of Eve, Adam. God divides the water and the earth, and God creates the sun and the moon and the plants. I don't know about the plants. God divides light from darkness. So he moved from here to here, and what's fascinating to see is him gaining confidence and the ability in his painting and the technique of fresco, because it gets better and better as he goes. And by the time he's finished with God divides light from darkness, you're like, wow, that's fantastic stuff, the way he's able to foreshorten and create these really, really wonderfully animated figures. So let's take a close-up. It's mind-boggling. As long as I've studied this thing, I'm just like, you continue to see things more and more. So this is a Jonah. He is the one at the end closest to the altar. This is when they restored it. And the reason why I have it up here is because you can see how Michelangelo had to deform the perspective, right? Yeah. So if something is further away, you have to make it look bigger, right? So that it looks like it's a flat plane. Has anybody seen that Sidewalk Artist?
Yes.
It's the same idea.
Yes.
The same idea.
You have to look at it as a certain point
Right.
to really
to
get
make
the
it
effect of the
look right.
three-dimensional
Right.
depth. And
So all of
volume,
this was
yeah.
happening. The other thing that Michelangelo realized that if these figures are 64 feet in the air, he's got to use some really, really brilliant colors, because by the time we perceive them down on the ground floor, they're going to be diluted. So right after the unveiling of the cleaning of the ceiling, do you know what the Americans said? all the Italians were fine with it. It was all the art historians in America. They were like, oh, you guys, you took off too much of the, you know, the paint.
Right.
You know, the beautiful patina. Well, actually, that was candle dirt, you know, dirt from the pollution in the candle. It was meant to be that bright. It was. And,
I don't think they really thought that it would. They thought it would be really very muted colors.
I know.
And they go, oh my God, it looks like a cartoon. You know?
Well, no, that's
just so weird.
right, we just weren't expecting it. And I just thought it was funny that the United States like got on the bandwagon of you Italians, you screwed it up. They didn't screw it up. They knew exactly what they were doing. And the cleaning is really fascinating. I won't even get into that. Okay. So the contrast there, you know, just amazing in terms of the cleaning, the dramatic difference between all the years and years of candlelight, air pollution. Oh, there was just, you know, restorations and rabbit glue and you name it, they threw at it. And so they were trying to clean it up and they did a fantastic job with it. It's just stunning today. The creation of Adam, probably one of the most, besides the Mona Lisa, probably the most recognizable image of Western civilization. That moment in time when God the Father, with little Eve under his arm, right? There's Eve, and the Cupids are kind of flying around. That sort of zap, boom, you know, that's the beginning of mankind. It's incredible. And again, that sort of limp wrist where, you know, he's barely able to keep up the strength, and then he's about to just be enlivened with God's power. There is an art historian who said, and he kept looking at that cloak and said, wait a minute, this is reminding me something. Here's the beautiful, beautiful line work of Michelangelo. And there's God the Father. And so this art historian said, hey, wait a minute, you know, Michelangelo did know what a dissection of a brain looked like. And so what he's proposing, and I'm going to leave it up to you to decide whether you want to buy it or not, but he said that cloak, God the Father, is actually the frontal lobe, the frontal cortex. He even goes as far as saying, okay, the little thing is the pituitary gland, spinal cord, the pons. Pretty crazy. What do you think? Do you buy it?
Yeah.
Do you buy it?
I don't have any problem with that.
The beginning of man's
That's
awareness
right.
and reasoning.
That's correct.
And yeah.
Because our more primitive brain is down here. It's evolution. Our more primitive brain is here. Our frontal cortex are the higher reasoning. You know, this is where we're all doing that high level critical thinking up in here. This is flight or fight, right? This is high calculations and you know, all kinds of wonderful things up there. So maybe.
But they didn't,
Where's
know,
the
they
pineal
didn't know
gland
that
in
back
there?
then.
No, they didn't
They
know
thought
that.
it was all
Good
for
point.
cooling the blood back then, so
Yeah, right.
he wouldn't have
right.
known.
You know what my thought on it is? Yes, maybe, but I'm more about, and this goes back to my golden mean and Fibonacci numbers. You know what I'm going to say? That those things in nature have very similar angles and organic way in which they're represented, you know, so I think that's what's going on there. I don't know. It's fun to think about anyway. And I'm going to leave it up to you to decide. Daniel, before and after a restoration. And you know, it's just wonderful because these are just like some of the small side parts, because that central strip is really the highlight. And I mean, as we look, there's these little ignudi, they call them. I love that word, ignudi. They're the little nudes here, holding up the book, right? And then over here is architectural details that actually look like carved stone, right? It's known as grisaille. It's a painting meant to look like architecture or an architectural ornament. So he's doing some amazing things with integrating, you know, that curved surface of the barrel vault to make it look like it's subdivided and has all kinds of architectural molding. That's what, you know, this looks like, right? That's just made up. It's not three-dimensional, but it looks three-dimensional.
Is it natural lighting?
Natural
from
lighting.
the windows, or is the brightness of the paint that it makes it?
The natural lighting in the Sistine Chapel is pretty dim because the windows are pretty small. They're up top, and so It's pretty bright. It's pretty bright. I just show you this one because you can start to see some of the detail. This anchor for some of the ribbons that he uses. He uses garlands and ribbons to sort of visually tie in the different themes. This sort of rolled piece of parchment. And also, he's showing off a little bit. During this time period in the Renaissance, there was a thing that, there was fashion and all this kind of thing. And there was this stuff, and this doesn't happen to be silk, but you'll get the idea. There was a thing called shot silk. And shot silk was fabric that was imported, or probably made there, I don't know where it came from, where the warp and the weft is made with two different colors. So the warp goes this way, the weft goes this way, that's the weaving of this cloth, and so maybe the warp is gold, right? And then the weft is green. And depending how you position it, right, you get some great variations in color. And so this was like the cool thing to have during the Renaissance. And so he's saying, oh, well, and you want to like paint this? Like, oh God, It's like, so he's showing off. He's showing off not only like it's the latest thing, but it's also like, hey, I'm going to show off because I know how to paint something like this, which is extremely difficult. A piece of cloth that changes color in front of your eyes, like, oh gosh, So that's just a little tidbit. As he's working on the ceiling, his neck is getting more and more painful. And there was a time when he actually, because he spent hours and hours in this position, when he looked down and looked straight ahead, it produced a searing pain in his head because it was constantly up. Have you ever had an experience like that? When you go back to normal, it's like painful? Well, this is what he exhibited. So there were times when, with a barrel vault, right, the scaffold was flat. There were times when he was actually on his back because he was way over here, right, where the ceiling is close. But when he got to the middle of it, right, he's up like this. Can you imagine? 40 years? And it's amazing he was able to do it in 4 years. So this is a piece of his little sketchbook, and I just absolutely adore it because he's telling his dad, I'm in pain as I do this. But that didn't stop him. He continued on and created a masterpiece. Here's some two other little figures. I just adore them because they're just like little add-ons. Here you can see the ribbon that helps connect the two figures and a medallion in the middle. This is actually the beginning of God creating or separating the light from the darkness. We also have acorns, and that's a symbol for the Rovieri family, and that is the family that Pope Julius II came from. So it was kind of like paying honor to his family. And there's the Rovieri shield there, and so there's, you can see the little acorn. So another close-up of it. Here you have Adam, the creation of Adam, the creation of Eve. And I think what's fascinating is when you compare the very first one, which is the drunkenness of Noah and the flood, to the final one, which is God creating the sun and the moon. You can see an incredible difference between the two. So this one is the first one he did, and this is the final one that he did. So he's gaining his confidence and getting really good at what he's doing. So really, really powerful, incredible imagery that he finally ends up with. So 4 years, and finally it's done. Okay, so shoo! He gets to go back to Florence, hangs out. At this point, Lorenzo has passed away. And with the passing of Lorenzo, the Magnificent, Florence, the power of the Medicis starts to go downhill. There are sons of Lorenzo, and one of them is Giuliano de' Medici, and this is a tomb that is in the Medici Chapel in San Lorenzo. And here you can see three sculptures created by Michelangelo. The one on the right is obviously not finished. This is day and night, and that is Giuliano, who is represented as sort of like a Roman Senate. So those connections with the classical world. You can see, incredible. Taking the opportunity to do a lot of detailing in his armor incredible, the detail. You can see how he enjoys doing curls of hair, taking that drill and drilling deep into the marble so that you get those deep, dark contrasts with the white marble and the deep shadows. Night on the one side and day on the other. As far as I know, he never, I don't think he ever saw a woman nude, to tell you the truth. I mean, there's no documentation of that. But just looking at the way that he represents the figures, they just look like men with like breasts attached. It just doesn't seem like. And at that point, it wasn't until for a male artist to have a female model. I mean, I'm sure there were prostitutes and things like that, but officially, like sort of on the level, it didn't come until like late 1800s.
What about dead bodies?
Dead bodies. Yeah. What about dead bodies? I don't know. Maybe he was restricted even for the dead bodies. I don't know if it's documented, so I don't know. Thank you for. And now he gets to go back to Rome, 1534. So more than 20 years after painting the ceiling, he gets called back by, and this is a different pope now, Pope Paul the Third, to paint the Last Judgment. So remember the barrel vault in the Sistine Chapel? So you have that big barrel vault, right? That's the main part. And on that far wall, Pope Paul he said, and I have a quote here, he says, "Finally, I'm Pope. I've wanted this for years and years, and I'm gonna get it, darn it all." Let's see, what do we have here? It says,
True spirit.
I know.
it's so funny, these guys. Here it is. "I have had this desire for 30 years, and now that I'm Pope, am I not to satisfy it? I will tear up this contract," which was the reference to the tomb, because Michelangelo's like, "Hey, what about the tomb? What am I supposed to do to the tomb? And in any case, I intend to have you serve me." So, ta-da, there you go. So, can you imagine this? Okay, so Michelangelo's like 60 years old, and he's like, "Are you kidding me? I'm going back to the Sistine Chapel and I'm going to go paint this large wall." And so he's like, "Okay," because again, you don't say no to the Pope.
Is this a vertical wall?
Oh, it's a vertical wall. But I recently discovered, I didn't do it, I did my research, the wall, Michelangelo had the wall built out at an angle with brick. So it's nothing you can notice. It was probably, I think it was 9 inches from deviation from the top to the bottom, 9 inches, so that's not much of an incline. But the reason why he did it was he wanted to keep it clean. He said that if I have it inclined, the dust will sort of not fall on top of it. I also think that in terms of working with a fresco, if it's slightly inclined, you don't have stuff, falling on, the other one. So it was just interesting. I never knew that. So what's happening here? You get Last Judgment, and what happens in the Last Judgment? It's a story in the Bible. Somebody tell me what happens. Heaven or hell, right? So this is the Day of Judgment. It's in the book of Revelations. This is okay. So the angels come out, they start tooting on their horns, and you better get ready because you got to know where you're going to go. And so the angels are actually right here, and they're tooting their horns. Da, 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 da. It's the end of the world, and now you're all going to be sorted out. You're either going to go to heaven or you're going to go to hell. Even if you were buried, you're going to come out of your little tombs. And over here is a book, and the book is more heavily weighted for the ones that are damned than the elect. They call them the elect and the damned. So the elect, there's a few pages, and the damned, there's a lot of them. And that's an insight into Michelangelo's sort of psyche. He he just thought that there were a lot of bad people around, I think, and So what's happening? It's really interesting because who can you imagine there? That's Jesus, right? He looks like Apollo. He looks like a Greek or Roman god, right? And Mary there, sort of in a demure position. And he has all the saints in this band. So there's people like St. Bartholomew, St. Catherine, St. Sebastian. This is St. Peter, who has the keys to the church. Up above, and I've had students say, "Mrs. Nelson, I see a skull And I'm like, what the heck are you looking at?
Oh, right. Yes.
And they're like, oh, you're right. And I've never read that in a book never read that in a book, but it does look sort of like a skull. I don't know if that's meant to be that way or not. There's another one that says this is actually a side self-portrait of Michelangelo, and the more I stare at it, the more I can't find it. I'm like, you guys are nuts. So these guys, they're all secure. You know, they're the saints, everything's good. Now, down below, this is not good. Especially over here, this is really, really, really scary in terms of what Michelangelo imagined. The monsters coming up and grabbing these people and saying, oh, you're not going to heaven, we're going to pull you down. And they're just horrible, frightful figures with horns, I'll show you. These guys, oh my goodness, I hope I end up with these guys, because they're rising up. They're being actually pulled up by angels. Angels are like, oh, come on up here, yeah, it's okay. And one of them's even using a rosary, like as a sort of a hoister rope. Come on up. And these poor guys, oh, geez, you don't want to be in that pack. And this figure is always just an amazing, emotional, sort of paranoid figure. Let's take a close look here. Oh my goodness, over 300 figures. It's just mind-boggling. When you walk in, oh, tell you, who's been in the Sistine Chapel? Oh gosh, yeah, it takes you forever. By the time you get in, you're like, woo, at least I was, because it was 100 degrees. There's no air conditioning. There's no even moving air. And I thought it was like sturdy and strong, and I'm like, oh my God, I think I'm gonna drop over right now. You wind your way through, because you start way over in the Vatican Museum. You wind your way through, and then all of a sudden you find yourself in the library, the Raphael paintings, right? And then finally you get in, and you end up in a doorway that's right here. So this thing is like at your back, and there's like a million people out there, and so you walk, and you're like, oh my goodness. And then finally you turn around, and you're like, wow, it's just overwhelming. So if you do make it, just make sure you just calm yourself down and then go find yourself a seat. There's benches all around the periphery. And I just waited for a bench to open up, and I just sat down, and then I could actually, relax and take it in, because it's really kind of overwhelming. And even, one visit, two visits, it's amazing. So Jesus, who is in the act of, he is judging. This is a judgment. He is judging. He's saying, you guys are going to hell, and you guys are the elect, you're coming in. When Michelangelo painted this, most of the figures were nude. And of course, when it was revealed, everybody was like, oh, there was like pornographic, like, don't do this. They were kind of upset. There was really mixed reviews. And it wasn't until later that they said, okay, we really need to cover these private parts of these poor saints and things like that, because they didn't feel that it was proper. So we'll get into that. Victoria Colonna as the Virgin Mary. Victoria was a noble woman, and she and Michelangelo became friends. I don't think there was anything, what do you call it? I think that it was a platonic relationship. They was mutually respected, and he really leaned on her for support. He only had a few really close friends, and she was one of them. And so he paid her honor by painting her face as Mary. When Michelangelo was in his 30s, this sculpture was unearthed, and this is Laocoon and his sons. There's a lot of conjecture about this sculpture. It was unearthed. I mean, they were building something, and all of a sudden, boom, it comes up, and everybody's like, wow. It's a Hellenistic Greek. That means about like 100 BC, Hellenistic Greek. But they think it's actually a Roman copy of Hellenistic Greek. So then that puts it into about 100 AD, or about 97 AD. So they're not even sure. They're even saying that it was actually created by Michelangelo. So we don't know. But we do know, on the surface of it, that he was incredibly moved by it and used it as a source of inspiration. So it has a lot of sort of intrigue surrounding it. but I like to imagine that as he studied the anatomy of Laocoon, who was a priest of Troy, who warned the Trojans about, you don't want that Trojan horse to come in, nobody listened to him, and Minerva got ticked off, and he sent snakes, and then the snakes strangled his sons and him. That's the shortened version of it. So he was kind of a sacrificial lamb. But that is an influence of the Greeks and the Romans on Michelangelo's work. This is Pope Paul III, and most people agree that St. Peter, his face is St. Peter's, and he holds the key. St. Peter was given sort of the responsibility of the church by Jesus. He says, this is your responsibility, handed over to you. He's a figure on the right-hand side. So Michelangelo is paying homage to his sponsor, right? This is St. Bartholomew. The way that St. Bartholomew, they invented wonderful ways to torture the early Christians. Remember that Christianity, after Jesus died, you were not allowed to practice. The Romans persecuted the Christians and basically tortured them and killed them, and not until Constantine in 300 AD said, okay, Christianity is official, it's okay. So there were wonderful ways, terrible ways that they would torture Christians. One of the ways that they would do this is they would flay people alive. So while you're still alive, they take what's known as a flaying knife, and that is what St. Bartholomew is holding. It's a wide knife with a very little piercing top, and they commence to take your skin off. And that's exactly what he's holding. He's holding a flayed skin. It's like, how creative can these minds be, in terms of their torture devices? And all of the saints, the martyrs, are with their devices or their implements of torture. There's a wheel that has spikes on it, and apparently, they would just like roll over people with these spiked wheels. But lo and behold, does anybody recognize the face of the flayed skin? Michelangelo, how'd you know? The flattened bridge, right. So what's all that about? Wasn't feeling too good. No, he was feeling kind of, he drove himself very hard, and he had high expectations for not only himself, but other people around him. And some people were not as, I think, honorable to him as could be, and I think he thought deeply about things, and so, here he is, he's sort of torturing himself, I suppose. Being used. Who said that? That was great. Who said that? Perfect. Being used. There you go. I think that's very well said. Just being used. Being sort of a mercenary, kind of thing. A puppet. There you go. It's excellent. There's that figure in the middle. And is this, oh, jeez, okay, I'm so sorry. I'm having so much fun. Okay, so the figure in the middle. So these crazy guys with their horns, how frightful, what a nightmare. And the talons and the claws. And there he is, he's like, holy cow, what have I just gotten myself into, There's people pulling at him, and he's right smack in the middle. We have this is Charon, Charon. He's the guy who paddles the boat and paddles everybody to hell, right, to Hades, right? And so what he's doing is, okay, so he paddled them all, and now he's like whacking at them and is like, okay, time to get off the boat, get out of here, go to hell. And they're all going, and they're being pulled down by demons. They're all going over to this one corner where King Minos is. King Minos is basically the devil, the gatekeeper, or the resident of hell. And there he is in the crazy demonic expression. People are like moaning and groaning, and it's all just terrible. And there's awful. He's got a mustache. They're very grotesque, we call it. And then there's King Minos. He actually has the face of a papal master of ceremonies. He was always taking his digs at Michelangelo. Well, this was an opportunity for Michelangelo to take his digs at the papal master. So he complained, and the papal master of ceremonies complained to the Pope, and the Pope said, you know, he didn't do anything. It's like, yes. It's interesting to note that the serpent is winding its way around the body, and the head of the snake is actually at the genitals of King Minos. So that's an interesting combination of symbolism, etc. This was actually revealed in the cleaning. Most people didn't even know of that symbolism. So it's pretty extreme in terms of his feelings towards those people that used him.
Why are all these paintings, the people are very thick and wide?
Thick and wide?
Yeah.
The proportion?
Yeah, versus his sculptures are lean and.
Good
more-
question. I don't know the answer to that.
Do you think it's visual so you can see it better from far away, or?
I don't know. I think that, and I think I don't know the answer to the question. He never really painted stretched and lean individuals. They were all very compact and muscular, solid, bulging muscles. I think that's it. He wanted power. He wanted, to see that strength. So good question. I don't know the answer to it. So why don't we have that bulk? We do have the bulk in some of the sculptures, but not all of them. Like David's very thin and lean. There's another beautiful one of a slave, and he's gorgeous. He's very thin and absolutely beautiful.
Too.
Yes. Yeah. It's interesting that we do have a copy of The Last Judgment. This was before the breecher's maker came in and put all the clothes on the individuals. And so this is what actually was the original. This gentleman, Venusti, came in. He created a painting and then he had it printed. So copies of the Sistine, The Last Judgment, traveled very rapidly throughout, and that's because of the recent invention of the printing press. Okay, so there you can see, this is The Last Judgment, and then the ceiling above. So remember the tomb of Pope Julius II? So this is what it ended up being. It includes one of Michelangelo's very, very successful sculptures, and this is Moses. And it's probably the one that he thought was the most lifelike. He was very proud of Moses, but the rest of the tomb is just a shadow of its original conception. And so let's take a look at Moses. And I know we need to go, so I'm going to speed it up a little bit. Moses is just amazing. The story goes that right when Michelangelo decided that that Moses was finished, I'm sure he was just like in a emotional state. He takes his hammer, he knocks the knee of Moses on the knee and says, "Stand, damn it." So there is even a whack on his knee, on his right knee. I don't know if it was actually Michelangelo's whack, but he was so incensed that he had created something that could just stand up. And by looking at it, it has this internal energy which is undeniable. Here's Moses. He's just come from Mount Sinai. He has the, the Ten Commandments, thank you, the tablets underneath his arms. And look at this leg. Isn't that great? He's just ready to take off, right? He's like this. He's just ready to go. And he's got the sort of the furrow in the brow, horns. That was thought to be a mistranslation of Moses as he came down from the mountain. He said radiated, his skin radiated, and there was a mistranslation in the Bible, so that's how we get the horns. And there he is, amazing, incredible. This is about a little bit smaller than the Pietà. Horns, I know, the horns. And you'll read different interpretations of it, like the horns and the power. I believe it was a mistranslation, a wrong translation of the story.
And you have the face and the beard.
I'm sorry?
The face, Michelangelo's face and the beard.
Oh, there's his face in the beard? Oh, I don't know that one.
When I saw it, that's what they told us.
Oh, okay.
If you look at it from an angle.
Okay.
Oh, freaky. Wow.
I don't know how to go back.
No, you didn't have the right angle that I saw
Previous-
yet.
Oh, it didn't have the right angle.
When you
Okay.
look at it from a certain angle, you'll see that.
You can see.
Yes.
I'll have
yes.
to check that out. Thanks. In the beard. Okay. This is very interesting how he has his fingers positioned to hold his beard. Just very, very graceful. And Michelangelo kind of showing off in terms of his ability. These are some of the other figures that never were complete, or this one, yeah, this is not complete. Several of the figures there are 4 slaves that were intended for the tomb. They were not finished. They're actually one of my favorites because you can actually see the working method of Michelangelo. 3 of them are at the Accademia, and they're just right on the hallway as it goes up to the David. This one is just, this is the one when you talk about, you know, that he could see that figure in the stone. This one I'm like, okay, I get it. This one also gets that feeling of that emerging from the bathtub, right? That water, you know, he's moving from the front to the back. I'm sure it wasn't like exactly that way, but his general approach was that way, front to back. This is another one, just blows me away. I love that one.
Were these unfinished or he meant
They're
them to be like
yeah,
this?
they're unfinished. These were meant to be for that tomb for Pope Julius II. They just were never finished. He wanted to finish them, but he kept getting called back to do the darn paintings. But this one blows me away because this one, you can see the beautiful strokes of the hammer, that there's a rasp that just kind of combs the stone. You can see some of the pattern there. I think that's just knockout. I prefer that over the David, believe it or not. The David for me is just too perfect. I like what is it, wabi sabi? You know wabi sabi? Wabi sabi is imperfection. You know, like I like this. I prefer that. And so we'll just go really quickly through St. Peter. So at 71 years old, he gets asked to take over the rebuilding of St. Peter's. Bramante was in control, but Bramante passes away, and now it's Michelangelo's turn to start influencing the restructuring. This is the original, this is early 300, and this is St. Peter's. That's Bramante's plan. When Michelangelo steps in, he says, well, maybe what we'll do is we will take the plan, we will have 2, 3, 4 subsidiary domes, 1 large dome, and then we're going to work on this beautiful portico, which is the porch. So some of it got revealed. This front is, the facade is created by him. It creates a sort of crescendo as we move towards the center. The parts are more tightly spaced, moving from a pilaster to a attached column. And these are known as colossal orders, and then of course the dome. He designed the dome. He didn't finish the dome. That came from Jacopo della Porta, and that was later on. He just didn't have time. This one blows me away. This is actually a model, and the model is, it's huge. It took him 4 years. So in order to develop the dome, he actually created a model to make sure that everything sort of worked. You know, you're building a dome for a cathedral, you better make sure it doesn't fall down. So he worked for 4 years on the model. You go to the Vatican Museum and make sure you check this thing out. This is amazing. And there are also other beautiful wood models that are just absolutely gorgeous. So here we are. The dome is 265 feet high. That's just the dome itself. If you stand at the base of the dome and look up, it's over 400 feet, and it's just cavernous. It's you can't even, you know, wrap your mind around it. It's so huge. Comparison, 190 feet, the Pantheon 150, Florence 130, so it's just massively huge. 2 different types of domes. The Pantheon is known as the hemispherical dome. The Santa Maria della Fiore in Florence is known as the archival dome. And the dome that Michelangelo designed was the archival dome. That is because it is a more self-supporting dome. The hemispherical dome, you just can't get that big. It just, physics just doesn't hold it up, so the archival definitely helps. And when we look at St. Peter's dome, there's actually a chain, an iron chain around the base of it to sort of hold it in place, and that chain gets replaced every like 50 years or so. So there you can see architectural sculpting. Michelangelo died at the age of 89, amazing, and he was still hard at work. He just like every day got up, and he was only sick for a couple of days. He was surrounded by all his friends when he passed away, and as I said, you know, they did inventory of his home, very modest. He had very, very few possessions, very few books, very few sketches, and was just wonderful in terms of the life that he led, incredibly productive, always striving, for perfection. His father was just relentless on him. It was kind of like he could never be pleased, and Michelangelo would send home money. He actually supported his three brothers. They never seemed to be very pleased with what Michelangelo did. The brother below him actually inherited the estate, and it was really quite a, it was a sizable estate. But here's the beautiful dome with the gorgeous way in which that the piers here are subdivided to make them look even more ethereal in terms of the weight that it's supporting. You can actually go up to the top and view the plaza down below. The letters around the dome are 6.5 feet tall. It blows me away. You can actually go up. Here, I'll show you. I was up there. It's just like, what, And so when you go there, go up. You can take an elevator. You go up the stairs, burn off those calories. But these letters, they're, like, here's the person, right? Look, that's crazy. So you just pop out and you're like, oh my God, It's amazing. This is one I took, and that you can see the mosaic around the drum, the interior of the drum. So absolutely beautiful way in which it's conceived. Giacomo della Porta, when he took over, he did use Michelangelo's plans, which is minor tweaks. So it is in essence Michelangelo's plan. And that's the view. And when you go up to the dome, you see the beautiful plaza. Plaza was finished by Bernini. He did the arms, and then he did, with his assistants, all the sculptures that are around him. And that's pretty much the end. I'm sorry it took so long. Does anybody have any questions? I know you probably want to go home and go to bed.
with you next time.
Yes, yes, everybody come. We'll have a great time, and we'll just go at a time where it's not going to be 100 degrees, so I don't feel like I'm going to just like flop over. Thank you so much, you guys. You were wonderful. Thanks for all the.
How long were you in?
Only a